Good Monday morning, everybody, and welcome to No More Mondays, the podcast built on three simple beliefs. Humans still matter, mediocrity is expensive, and ownership changes everything. And every single one of the conversations we have here is designed to help you do just that and live and lead with more intention. As always, I am your host, Angie Callan, and today's conversation is brought to you by Sundays. I don't even know the own title of my own book. Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries. It is my book. I do know the name of it. And it is really about rethinking how you live and work. So if you're ready to do that, head on over to Scary Good Read and grab a coffee a coffee and a copy. How's that? Man, you'd think I hadn't done this recently, but I just did. So let's get into today's show. I am excited to introduce all of you to Stephen Shapiro. He is an innovation expert, a keynote speaker, and author of a plethora of books on creativity and problem solving, all with very fun, intriguing titles, including his latest, You're Not Playing with a Full Deck. It is fresh off the presses and available on Amazon now. And I'm sure he will tell us how to find it as we get into things. Stephen has spent a lot of time helping organizations rethink how to approach innovation and leadership. And we're talking some good stuff like Nike, NASA, Microsoft, Marriott, 3M, the list goes on. But what caught my attention about Stephen when we crossed paths at the Thing, he's part of the Thing community. For those of you out there who listen frequently, you know what that means. It isn't about just his approach to innovation itself, but it's the idea that in this unpredictable world we live in, old playbooks don't work anymore. And that leaders who are thriving aren't those that are doing things perfectly and according to standards. They're the ones who are willing to think differently, ask better questions, approach humans in a new way, and move forward even when things aren't super clear. So today we're going to talk about how to do that and how to innovate amongst the uncertainty and how you leaders out there can navigate complexity without falling back on your laurels and leaning into outdated approaches. So after that long-winded and less eloquent than usual introduction, Stephen, welcome to No More Mondays.
Hey, it's great to be here, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who gets the title of my books wrong. I've done that in the past.
Yay, so it's not
just very
refreshing. You'd think after saying it 9,000 times, it would just roll off the tongue. But No More Mondays, Sunday Scaries, you all know what we're about around here. And as we get into things, I was struck by something as I was digging into you and perusing some of your books is that, one of the things, Stephen, that you say in kind of the leadership and innovation world is that best practices are stupid. Please tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's the title of one of my books. And the general idea behind that is that if we are trying to just copy what other people are doing, like replication, which is what a lot of people are doing, best practices are just doing what somebody else did, well, that's not innovation. And it might be useful in some situations, but the reality is you're always playing a game of catch up. By the time somebody's implementing their new practice, you're falling behind. And so, but there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, it's basically a recipe for mediocrity, to use a word that I think you were using earlier, to make sure that we are only doing what others are doing, as opposed to saying we're going to dig deep and really figure out what makes us special, what differentiates us as an organization, as an individual, as a team, and how do we double down on that so we can get the greatest impact.
And I think that I'm sure the AI thing is going to come up eventually. Here's the first drop of it. I feel like what you just said is more important now than ever, because we're not trying to differentiate ourselves just from competition. We're also trying to differentiate ourselves from, algorithms and automations and things like that. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, why do people lean and cling to these proven models so much, even when everything else is changing?
I think part of it is it feels there's safety in it. So if you do what someone else did, you at least can justify, hey, I did this, worked for someone else, it should work for us. So I think that we live in an environment where safety seems to be the name of the game. But the reality is the being safe is the least safe thing you could possibly do. And in an age of AI, I truly believe the only differentiator organizations are going to have are their people. And there's a number of studies that just came out that show that the large language models are getting better and better and better, but also they're giving the same exact answers. And so if you, as an organization, rely heavily on AI and all of your materials use AI, even if you're great at it, it's going to sound the same as everyone else. And so there's no differentiation there.
Yeah, the risk, in my opinion, of relying too heavily on whether it's standard practice, best practices, AI, or any of this other, this is how it should be done stuff, is you fall into this sea of sameness, which has existed. It's just way more obvious now that quite literally it's coming in the form of written content and output that you're like, oh, I've seen that phrase in my chat GPT before, right? And so I think that that's one of the reasons that we all as leaders or business owners should really start kind of thinking about this, what differentiates us. And you could not have given good old Angie Callen a better response, especially considering humans still matter is like the hill I'm going to die on, a better answer than that people are the differentiator. And I would love to hear a little bit more about how we can lean into that, even in this climate where like tech and automation seem to be so central.
I think tech and automation are great. So when I look at organizations, I look at everything they do in 3 different categories, and I call them support, core, and differentiating. And basically what that means is support are the things that support the business but don't create customer value. Core are the expectations. It's the table stakes. It's what everybody's doing. And then the differentiator is what you do that no one else does, that the world needs and craves and desires. And that's really what your special sauce is. And a differentiator can't be a technology that someone else can replicate. It can't be something that someone else can quickly do. So the only things that we have inside of organizations that will stand the test of time are human capabilities. And when we can get clear on what we do better than anyone else, that the world craves that no one else can do, and we focus our energies there rather than on technology, products, services, and offerings, we then are able to create something that will last and have impact and people will be hungry for.
Remember, AI is here to augment and enable, not replace. And when you lean into the humans that are the differentiators and are the unique special sauce and have the creative intelligence to think about things that don't exist, because by the way, AI can't do that, then you augment and enable them with AI. You've got a powerful combination, but you can't trade one for the other, or you're just going to fall into this sea of sameness. And so now I have a question that is slightly an aside, but I have a feeling is related. I want to talk quickly about your new book and what the title should be telling us. So what does "You're Not Playing with the Full Deck" mean?
So I had a lot of arguments with people over this. They're like, you're insulting people with that title. And I'm like, look, I've said controversial things like best practices are stupid and goal-free living, which is on how to live a life without goals. That's one of my books. So I don't step away from controversy. But the reality is none of us are playing with the full deck. No one. It's just true.
You're like, and look, it's controversial. It's also true.
It is controversial and true. And what I mean by that is if we think about a deck of cards, which is the metaphor in the book, and it's based on a game I developed called personality poker. If we think about a deck of cards as the abilities, the knowledge, the personalities, the wisdom that we have, none of us have everything. So we all have our differentiator as an individual. And then there are other people who bring their superpowers. And what ends up happening is the people who are different than we are the people who tend to drive us crazy. One of the things I say is the person you like the least is the person you need the most. And the reason for that is the person who you like the least is probably the person who's least like you, but they're the one who completes you. They're the one that you need. And so, for example, I am a very scattered person. So in personality poker, I'll just show you this real quickly. In personality poker, it's a deck of cards with words. So this one's like the disorganized card if people can't see it. And
you pulled that out cards real quick, Stephen.
I keep it nearby to remind me.
Yeah.
But that's me. So I'm a little scattered, a little disorganized, incredibly creative. But the thing I'm not is organized. I'm not structured. I'm not methodical. And those people typically drive me crazy, but what I've learned over time is I need those people. If I'm going to get anything done in my life, in work, I need the people who drive me crazy because they're going to be the ones who are my sort of secret weapon, the ace up my sleeve, so to speak.
Yeah. I hate the word balance, but in this perspective, I think it works, right? They balance out because the two of complementing skill sets. And it's funny you bring this up because this is essentially the Callen household. So I am married to disorganization, that guy has more hobbies and can spend a day doing nothing that makes a dime and be so happy and so fulfilled. And then on my side, I'm wired to just work 90 hours a week, systems thinker, organized. Why did you not put that back where it goes? But what's so funny about that, and I actually talk about this in my book, is the one balances out the other, right? He makes sure I go have fun and have a little bit of spontaneity in what would otherwise be an overly structured life. And I make sure there's some sort of vocation there to support the hobbies on his end. And so where I would love to take this now is back into a team environment of how does this help innovation? How does this help us navigate uncertainty? Why is this dynamic of, find the person who drives you nuts and let them compliment you in work so important in this day and age?
Well, I think that's really the beauty of human beings is it is the balance. I wouldn't use the word balance. I tend not to use that, but it's that balance, that complement of different styles that's so important. Now, here's something which is really critical though, is if you take two people, a scattered mess like me and an organized, structured person like you, and put them together, we could clash. So in the team environment, it actually has been proven to be counterproductive to do that unless there's a deep appreciation for what each person brings to the table. And so there's a lot of work you need to do to make sure it's not just about, okay, we're going to force you in a room and you figure it out. That's actually disastrous. It is how do we then, before we get started, understand how we will drive each other crazy? What's the value we each bring to the table? How do we make sure that we're giving each other what we need? And then in the end, we can create something beautiful. And I've seen this over and over and over inside of my work.
So from a practical perspective, let's say we're talking to a leader out there who's dealing with that dynamic, or maybe intentionally wants to create it, but knows they need to support it. What are practical tools that we can do to build that platform of kind of common understanding and respect?
The first thing is to make sure that when you look at your team, each person has to be playing to their strong suit. And what that means is each of us has something which we do really well. And what happens in a lot of situations, though, is in the workplace, sometimes people will put us in an environment where we're not able to thrive. So the first thing is just to make sure everybody's really doing what they are designed to do. And then you need to play with a full deck, which is to look at your team and say, do I have the people who are really great at data? Do I have the people who are great at creativity? Do I have the people who are great at planning the work and working the plan? Do I have the people who are great at making human connections? And then we need to make sure everybody knows how to work together to deal out the work so that people do what they do best. And even though my personality poker, people will think it's about the personality of the individual, it's actually about the personality of the team and the organization. Because teams have personalities, meetings have personalities, organizations have personalities, everything has a personality. And when you look at it through that lens, you get some power that you would not have if you only look at it as a series of individuals with personalities. It's the collective that has a personality.
Well, and I'll even go a step further. I think that a lot of cultures, I won't say most to be fair, are accidental and not intentional. And so if you don't take the steps to create that environment of mutual understanding, you will end up with a culture. You're going to have it one way or another. It's whether or not you've dictated it as to whether you get an ace of spades or a joker.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of jokers. And there's a chapter in the book called Culture Starts with Cult. The reality is most organizations embrace a cult mentality, which is saying that we want everybody to think the same way, act the same way, dress the same way, use the same three-letter acronyms. It's what we do inside of organizations, and it works from an efficiency perspective, and it's worked in the past, but in an environment where change matters, where diverse points of view matter, it doesn't work. And so what we need to start recognizing is if we only, basically when I look at the personality of an organization, it's not based on the number of people. It's based on what gets recognized, rewarded, and valued. And most organizations recognize, reward, or value one thing more than others. And that helps them until it hurts them. And so the question isn't to get rid of your culture, it's to broaden your culture and have a deep appreciation for all the different facets and how all the different styles come together and contribute.
And to seek out, I'm going to use the word diversity, but in this case, let's use it as experience diversity, not the classic response to diversity, because I completely agree with you from a hiring perspective, people tend to gravitate towards the thing they know, which is the thing that's similar. And that oftentimes isn't the thing that's going to bring a new perspective, bring innovation, right? That's falling into standard practice, especially if you're already in an ecosystem that is, here's a seat, what butt can I put in it, versus right butt, right seat, which is what you described with this idea of playing to people's strengths. And I think in this current ecosystem of technology as a coworker, essentially, right butt and right seat and activating human strengths is going to be kind of more important than ever in order to, keep up, stay ahead, and innovate. And I think that's really where this is all going. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about, if we can get ourselves to do this. And I think you gave some great tips on how leaders can think about this differently. Literally, I think the first one is just think about this versus don't let it be accidental. Now we're in this really rapid change and high innovation, high adaptability. How does this type of team makeup support our ability to navigate unpredictability and navigate things with an adaptive mindset?
Well, it comes down to different points of view combining together in very powerful ways. So, we've heard the expression opposites attract. It's not true. There's irrefutable scientific evidence that opposites don't attract, they detract, they repel. We want to be with people who are similar to us. So what ends up happening is in the workplace, if we surround ourselves with people who are similar to us, well, we basically hire people who fit the mold. And I always joke that if you only hire people who fit the mold, eventually the organization is going to grow mold because you're going to get moldy, stale ideas. And we can't afford to do that today. So we need to make sure that we are hiring people who don't fit the mold, put them in the right role, embrace creative tension, recognize that tension is a good thing, not a bad thing, if the tension and conflict is about ideas, not people. And then we can bring people together and we could talk about the science of breakthroughs and where breakthroughs come from. And again, it is always about diverse points of view coming together in unique ways. It is not about an expert just solving a problem. It is multiple perspectives blending together to see something new that wasn't seen before.
I love it, especially because it's within an environment where that has been not just allowed, but encouraged. And for some reason, I want to go talk to leaders for a second, more in their individual growth versus like the team. I think that leadership today has way more facets going on than it ever did before. And we're talking about one of them, right? How do I hire more diversity? How do I broaden the skill set? How do I make sure my team is human? Where do I bring in AI? But I think that makes a lot of leaders feel as if they have to have all the answers all the time. So how do we continue to lead confidently, even in this world where there's no way we're going to have all the answers?
So first of all, I love that you said that because my big belief is that anybody who thinks they have to have the answers is going to be wildly disappointed. The role of a leader is not to have the answers. The role of a leader is to ask questions of others that get others to ask better questions. And the biggest issue that we have, I think, inside of organizations is that we spend way too much time solving the wrong problems. We're working on the wrong thing. We get distracted by a new technology, a bright, shiny object. This is the problem of the day. And that doesn't work. So if leaders become better question askers, then their organizations become better question askers. And if you think about the biggest challenge we have with AI, it's not what AI does, but if I ask AI the wrong question, it'll give me 1,000 irrelevant answers. Mm-hmm. So how do I make sure every person in my organization understand what matters most, how our organization differentiates? Where should we be focusing our energies? How do we collaborate in ways that we are struggling to collaborate? And when we change the questions, we change the solutions that become visible.
I love that there's a real, I feel like the AI situation is a very good, it's a good visual anecdote to a bigger picture here. And that is that what you get out of AI is only as good as what the the driver puts into it, right? It's only as good as how you converse with it. And I think that is an example of this same idea that your solutions as a team are only going to be as innovative as the problem statement you've set ahead of it. How do we change that? How do we get more creative and thoughtful and curious around our framing of challenges or problems?
Yeah, so the first thing is just to acknowledge that as human beings, we're not wired to do that. I mean, as human beings, we are wired to jump to answers because the brain is not wired for innovation, it's wired for survival. And so the brain, whatever we did prior to getting together today didn't kill us, so the brain says, oh, it's safe. Let's do what we did before. And that's why it's so difficult to get people to innovate. So that's the first step. Now, there are tools. I have a book which is specifically about reframing. It is a tool that helps companies not solve problems, but reframe the problem. I'll give you a very simple story that I love. I think I may have even shared that at the thing, which was an airport was people were complaining at this one airport that it took too long for the bags to arrive at baggage claim. So
this is a great story, by the way.
I love this one. I love this one. And it gets at the power of changing the question. And we could literally spend hours just on this one problem and riff on it. So this airport wanted to find a way of making passengers happy. Their biggest complaint was baggage claim took too long. So they said, okay, great. We need to figure out what's going on. And they did some research and they found that it took 15 to 20 minutes for the bags to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So they decided to solve the problem. How do we speed up How do we speed up the bags? And they spent a ton of money on faster conveyor belts, more baggage handlers, newer technology. They got it from 15 to 20 minutes down to 8 to 10 minutes. Now, most people, when they do that, when they cut the time in half, would be popping the champagne, celebrating, and moving on to the next problem. But they asked the passengers, what's your biggest complaint? And it was still baggage claim. And they knew they couldn't get the bags to go any faster. So then they had an epiphany. The bags took 15 to 20 minutes to get from the plane to, or they got it down to 7 to 8 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes for the bags to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. But it only took the passengers 1 to 3 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So instead of speeding up the bags, they slowed down the passengers and they literally just moved baggage claim a little further away so that people would have to walk. And people were happy because their bags were there when we got there. And they experienced the wait time differently because busy time, walking time, doesn't feel the same as boring wait time. So there's so much we could do with this, but it's just a great example of how changing the question fundamentally shifts how we look at solutions.
Yeah. Well, a former engineer who loves people over here. So yeah, a part of me wants to like riff on this case study for hours because I think it's fun. But what I think is so funny is they tried to re-engineer a process when really they realized that the solution was to address it from the human side. And I think that that's a really good metaphor for many things that we try to like systematically engineer and over process. And really the solution ends up being a human one. And a big part of that is perspective. Right? It's just like the way I think about that is if I don't drive a lot of places where there's traffic anymore now that we live up in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. But if you're driving somewhere where there's a bunch of traffic and you choose to get off the highway and take the scenic route, there's a very good chance you're going to reach the destination at the exact same time, maybe even 5 minutes later, but you were moving the whole time. And so it makes us feel something differently. And to me, the whole point here is looking at your problems as potentially symptoms instead of causes, right? I think we jump to conclusions really quickly, both in business and in dealing with, human challenges, and make assumptions that we take a problem at face value versus lingering long enough to say, wait, are we actually asking the right questions to solve the right problem? And that's the crux of the whole airplane story.
Absolutely. We do make assumptions. We jump to conclusions. And people, when they hear innovation, they think it's the same as creativity, but they're actually very, very different endeavors. Creativity tends to be more on the artistic side of things. Innovation is more on the analytical side of things. So the innovation process does not start with an opinion, suggestion, idea, or solution. It starts with a well-framed, important problem or opportunity. And then from there, we can move forward with finding solutions. And we jump to solution finding way too early in the process. and we find solutions that are impractical, or solutions that just don't solve the real problem, or they're solutions that we'll never be able to implement because they're too difficult. And if we step back and say, I need to be thoughtful about the problem I'm solving, and then also be thoughtful about the process for implementing the solution, boy, we can just totally fundamentally shift things. And I think the reason why people are so busy sometimes is because they're doing the wrong work. This is not about doing more with less, which has been a mantra in too many organizations. I believe the key is to do less and get more. If you can figure out what matters most, and you hyper-focused on the things that are going to move the needle the fastest, the best, and you put your energies there, you will always get better results than if you try to do a lot of things faster.
Oh, I feel like I have met my match in the catchphrases department, and part of me wants to have a phrase off, but we will save that for a different day. But it's like all of these little phrases are they're catchy, but they're memorable in this idea that we don't really have to work smarter. Efficiency for efficiency's sake is actually not efficient, right? And it's a lot like in the software world, where I work with a lot of clients. Engineers love to make products for product's sake without actually looking to find that there's a market fit for it. And this is exactly the same thing. It's like, we have a solution. Let's go find a problem that it solves versus what problem do we have to solve? Are we actually solving the right problem, which is where innovation begins? And I want you to say again, there was something in there that I think could get lost, and I think it's really important. And that was the relationship between creativity and innovation. So let's revisit that again.
Sure. So creativity, look, people, when they hear creativity, they tend to imagine somebody just sort of laying on the ground, smoking a joint, looking at the clouds, and coming up with some cool, wacky ideas. And look, we can come up with a lot of ideas, but I think it's an old George Carlin joke. He said, I got a lot of ideas. The problem is most of them suck. And that's the problem with creativity, is we come up with a lot of really bad ideas that don't solve problems, that have no value, that might be interesting, but who cares? So I think it's really the who cares and what pain are we solving and what problem do we need to address. If we focus on that, that's innovation. That requires data. It's not sitting at the clouds. It's actually talking to customers, understanding what keeps them up at night. What's the pain points? And if we can understand those, we can have greater leverage and greater focus.
Anybody who's sitting, all of my coach friends who are out there and have had me help you build your business, Stephen just validated my entire existence, because
Yay.
I talk so much about problems and solutions. And in the coaching world specifically, we're real good at, I just want to coach people, right? We do lay in the ground, smoke a joint, look at the clouds, right? Versus the okay, what's the purpose of this joint in my hand? But I mean, it's legitimate that you can have an idea. It can start there. However, it doesn't really become innovation and doesn't become sticky until you think about, how is this idea a solution to a problem that exists, versus trying to find a problem in order to fit my idea into a quote unquote solutions. Because that is, whether you're serving an individual client in a coaching business or you are a Fortune 500 leader, we know buying is still driven in that emotional, what problem does it solve way. And I think that's such a good, cool way to take this conversation and make it really applicable to kind of whatever size business that you're in. And maybe even there's a little life lesson in here somewhere, which, here's what I take that life lesson to be in summary. Stephen, tell me if I'm on track. Embrace creative tension. Love that phrase. Ask better questions. I call that lingering at the top in coaching, because a lot of coaches just like to go to problem solving mode instead of lingering at the top to make sure they're actually solving a problem and not the symptom. Allow discussions on your team. Be curious. And I'll challenge you. Are you being creative or are you actually being innovative? Because none of us is playing with full deck. None of us is playing with a full deck. And we need to remember that in both life and leadership. And speaking of no full decks, Stephen, how do people find you, get this new book, get the book that came before it, and tune into all your catchphrases?
Yeah, I do have a good collection of catchphrases, so we'll have to do a showdown one of these days. That'd be fun. So you can find me at theinnovationspeaker.com, theinnovationspeaker.com. Or if you want to just dive right into the book, go to fulldeckbook.com. stephenshapiro.com. And I think people find I designed the book to be read in 90 minutes. So it is like my shortest book by far, and super easy to read, but incredibly action oriented. So I'm pretty happy with this one.
Speaking of knowing your audience and solving the right problems, people don't read long stuff anymore. So way to, triage exactly what people need. And also suddenly I feel the need to have a game show, but I can't call it catchphrase because isn't that a board game?
It sounds like something. And by the way, I always wanted to be a game show host growing up. So this is perfect. We found something that we can do here.
You are about to have way more from the two of us. Also, I feel like you'd be a great game show host, and that's a huge compliment.
Thank you.
Drew Carey, watch out. All right. So as we wrap this up, I love this. This is such cool new perspective, but also a really compelling way to talk about it. I appreciate this because these are things that I think, and it's nice to have someone else who validates the madness in my head. And speaking of the madness in my head, we're in this very ever-changing, unpredictable market that I think is, going to continue changing. So as we think about the future of work, I want to hear what you think it looks like, but more importantly, how we humans stay human while navigating it.
Yeah, it's a really important thing. I think the first thing is just to recognize that the world will always change, always has changed. And so if we can, coming back to something I said before, understand what lights us up as human beings, as an individual. What are we great at? What does the world need? What does it crave? What do we do that no one else can do? And we really double down on those things, and we encourage everyone else around us to do that, and we each appreciate what each person brings to the table. That keeps us sane, it keeps them sane, and collectively, together, we're going to create some beautiful things that might not have been created otherwise.
I feel like in 2 sentences, you just said so many things that I'm like, right? Impact is there, empathy is there, ikigai is actually even in there somewhere, right? So somewhere. How's that for a conversation about what it really means to live and work with intention? Awesome.
That was fun.
That was totally fun. Stephen Shapiro, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and sharing some of your fun and your catchphrases and telling us about your new book. I've loved it.
It was a blast for me, and I'd love to do a catchphrase showdown as our next episode.
I'm mostly serious on that. I've had an inkling of wanting to host a game show, and now I feel like you maybe just pushed me over that edge. So all of you out there, just stay tuned. You never know what is coming over here from both idea generator and innovator, especially when enabled by great human companions like Stephen. If you out there who are listening, thank you. If this conversation resonated with you, I would love for you to share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Leave us a 5-star rating because clearly we are awesome. And if you haven't checked out Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries, so that I can prove that I know the name of my own book, head over to scarygoodread.com, grab your copy, and start rethinking the way you approach life and work, and take some of the thoughts here to rethink how you approach leadership as well. Until next time, please remember that humans still matter. Mediocrity is expensive, but ownership changes everything. Here's to fewer Sunday Scaries and more No More Monday.